Well, another episode of Jay Leno's Book Club. Remember, no self-help, no weight loss, just stuff that rolls, explodes, and makes noise. We're here with the legendary Pete Brock. Well, you can't talk about racing in the 50s and 60s without Pete. The Cobra Daytona Coupe, of course, many, many cars. But we're here to talk about this car because he was instrumental in designing this car and working on this car. He's written a book called Corvette Sting Ray, Genesis of an American Icon. And on the cover is Bill Mitchell's Stingray race car, which we had here at the shop, and we were thrilled to have GM send it to us. Tell us about the book. What made you write this all of a sudden?
Well, I'm the last remaining guy on the whole team that put the Stingray together, and nobody'd ever put the story together, and I thought that it was important because it took 6 years from the time that the project started till it went into production, and it almost got caved in 2 or 3 times during that period of time. And before and after that, the Corvette's been on a very, very tenuous lifeline, really until today with the new C7. I think that we're finally seeing the ultimate Corvette that's come out, the new C7. But all of those things that Zora Duntov and Ed Cole and Harley Earl and of course Bill Mitchell all worked in on these 4 people were the key guys that made the Corvette happen. And if you'd pulled any one of them out, the Corvette would have disappeared.
Yeah.
So through a number of different political problems, financial problems with the company, poor sales or whatever, the Corvette barely made it. But if it hadn't have been for Bill Mitchell, we wouldn't have a Corvette today. And it was this particular car that really put him over the top, and we ended up with this car here,
Right.
which is the American icon.
Yeah, it really is the American icon. And you know, nowadays we think of Corvette as hugely successful, but back in the day, the 55 T-Bird blew it out of the water as far as
Absolutely.
sales were concerned, because that was a personal luxury car.
Right.
And it had a V8 when the Corvette had a 6. And GM wasn't about racing. They didn't. I remember reading about somebody trying to tell one of the GM executive about disc brakes. Disc brakes, not an airplane.
Yeah,
what do you think it is? I mean, it was just, it was.
They didn't know, you know.
Yeah.
Sports cars on the East and West Coast were still, you know, really took off about 1951. That's when Harley Earl saw his first race at Watkins Glen. And it was interesting that one of the first races I went to was at Pebble Beach in 1951. And I have some pictures I took in there when I was like 14 years old.
Yeah.
But that was the thing that got me started, and it's actually the thing that got Harley Earl started on building the Corvette. And he saw the XK120 Jaguar, and he used the exact dimensions on that car because nobody knew anything about sports cars in Detroit. So they brought one in, they measured everything in the car, and if you measure that car out, the first Corvette that came out in production in 1954 is an XK120 inside.
Wow, that's really,
Yeah.
see, that's something I didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the fun thing about reading a book written by one of the guys that was actually there. You pick up all these cool little facts. Now, the Stingray, of course, especially the coupe, was a breakthrough car because this was the first hardtop.
First coupe,
First
right.
coupe, yeah, yeah. And of course, the legendary split window. I knew a guy whose dad bought a 63, and when the 64s came out, he was so depressed, he took it to a shop and had them cut out the centerpiece and put a window,
yeah.
so people would think it was a 64.
Right.
And now the car is worth, you know, it drops about 10 grand in value because
More,
of that.
I think he's dropped a lot more than 10 grand
Yeah.
in value.
Now let me ask you, with the split window, it was controversial at the time because did Mitchell like the look of the Bugatti with the split window and some of the European cars?
Well, it was influenced by a number of different cars. Mitchell told us that the 57 Atlantique, of which you have a beautiful example here, was one of the cars that really affected him as far as the styling cues on the car. But if you begin to look back at what was done before that, actually Harley Earl did his version of the C2 that was
Yeah.
never produced, which is in there, and it has a split window. And he actually lifted that off of Franco Scaglione's Bat 7 at the
okay.
Turin show in '57, because that had been used very effectively by Franco Scaglione. So the split window idea has been used a lot of different times, and then he used it as well in the Motorama show car, the Golden Rocket that he did for Oldsmobile in the '56. So it's been around, but Mitchell wanted to put that in there. It was going to be his signature. He was the heir apparent for
Sure.
styling, taking over from Harley Earl, and it was going to be a hardtop. It was going to be a complete breakaway in design, and this was the result. And this is really Bill Mitchell's design. We were simply the guys that interpreted it for him.
And of course, customers didn't like the split window, did they? Because they felt they couldn't see out the back.
I think there were some initial problems with it, because when Bill talked about it initially in the studio, I mean, it was a very elegant little thin line that
Right.
came off the top. And of course, Zora was very practical, and he was saying, you know, as soon as the engineers get a hold of this thing and put the chrome around it and the rubber and the whole thing, he says it's going to end up about that wide. And Mitchell said, well, that's my decision to make. And it became a political turf war. And finally, even Zora was kind of banned out of styling over this because he objected to these things so much.
Sure.
But Ed Cole, who was Zora's boss at Chevrolet Engineering, solved the problem politically. He said, Zora will let you have it as soon as we have 1 year of Bill Mitchell's split window, and then we'll switch it over.
Okay.
So everybody got what they wanted. You know,
Yeah.
it was a matter of compromise.
You think it would be the collector vehicle it is today if the split window had gone 2 or 3 more years?
No, I think it probably would have lost some of the mystique.
Yeah,
And that's the thing that makes this particular car so fantastic. When guys are looking for a Corvette coupe, they are looking for a 63 coupe.
Right, right.
You know, I mean, that is the whole essence of Bill Mitchell and why this car is so special. All the rest of the Corvettes are beautiful. I mean, I see every one of them. They're just lovely on the street. They still are striking.
Oh yeah, I drive this and people come up and you know what's so funny? Every time you see them now, they have modern mag wheels, or you're certainly not with white walls.
Yeah.
But when you see it in the period dress with the white walls and the knockoff hubcaps, it really makes an impression. I realize now I love this so much better than a modified car.
Yeah, if you take and change an era, even a thing like running the wrong color paint on a car changes the era on it, and it ruins the car. I mean, you have to stay with the original, what was available at the time and the designer's original intent.
Yeah, and it's just an iconic car. The whole story is in here. Tell us some more about, so you were what, 24, 25 when you were there?
19 when I went into GM.
Wow, 19.
And then I did this car when I was 20. I didn't do this particular car.
Right.
This particular car was the production car, and that was done by Larry Shinoda and Tony Lapine, who of course went and headed up Porsche. But the prototype car, which you see on the cover here, was taken from my sketches. Bill selected those lines, and we built that car. And that was actually built on the Corvette SS Mule that Harley Earl and Zora had run at Sebring in 1957.
So tell me about that. Was that kind of scary when I mean, you're 19, you're 20, and Bill Mitchell was he was a big guy anyway.
Well, he was a big guy in his persona. He actually wasn't physically big.
Oh, I thought
but when he walked into the room, he filled it up. I mean, he was a very powerful person.
Yeah.
He was a very loud, ribald character, dressed beautifully all the time. And, you know, he had such a great love for what he was doing. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. If he saw it, he was passionate about it. And if you even veered a little bit off that line, he would set you straight on it right away. This is the way we're going to do it, you know.
Did you find a lot of people at GM didn't get the Corvette? Disc brakes, independent suspension, you don't need any of that. I mean, was there a lot of that?
It was so much of that, Jay, because the whole idea of what we call flatlanders back there, because the roads are absolutely straight in every direction.
Yeah.
And that had a lot to do with the way cars were designed in America a long time. A lot of the ideas of what an American car should have been was that you got into this living room and it took you someplace.
Right.
The whole idea of a sports car really didn't make much sense at all because there was no sport in driving in straight lines.
Sure.
So the whole Midwestern idea of doing this car was very, very foreign. And if it hadn't have been for people who had a little bit more understanding of European cars, Bill, of course, had traveled over to Europe, had seen all those cars over there, And all of those things influenced him into doing it.
You know, of all the Corvette books that have been written, and there's hundreds of them.
Yes, yeah,
It's amazing. This is the first one written by someone who was actually there,
right.
which is almost hard to believe.
Well, Dave McClellan did a really, really great
Yeah.
book on his whole whole period that was there, and I found that very, very interesting. And the other book that I found great was a good one called All Corvettes Are Red.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing that was so important about that is that it showed that if you were a real car guy, if you wanted to work on Corvettes, that was pretty much the end of your career in ascendancy into management in General Motors, because that wasn't what the kind of cars that they built. It wasn't a money maker.
Yeah.
And it was a car guy's project, and it shows the whole difficulty of doing that, and how much you cared about it wasn't really important to top management at that time.
Yeah, and that was a time when you sold millions of units of cars. I mean, nowadays, if you sell 20,000 of any model, oh my God, you're a hero.
Yeah, right.
Then you would have got fired. I always remember they said the Corvette was the Corvair was a huge failure because they only sold 1.8 million of them. Compared to the Mustang, it was 1.8 million. That's nothing. I mean, now you'd be president of the company.
Yeah, exactly. This particular sketch was one that I did in the November of 1957. We'd already been into it several weeks on it, but this really defined the lines that Bill Mitchell had wanted. And as you can see, everything that's on this car behind us in 1963 was laid out in 1957. But it didn't really happen that quickly because there was so much resistance from management that the project didn't go. And the only way that we were able to finally get it over the top was Mitchell said, I'm going to build a race car, because management would not allow him. This whole car, the whole development of the Corvette was done completely in secret, because what had come in, Harlow Curtis had decided as president of General Motors that they were going to ban all performance in Detroit.
Sure.
And he got together with the head of Chrysler, the head of Ford, and they all agreed unilaterally, no more performance, no more advertising. So the car was killed off.
Yeah.
But Bill Mitchell decided that he would build this car in secret, and then he could not put the Chevrolet name on it. He could not put the Corvette name on it.
Wow.
So he called it the Stingray and raced the car privately. And the car was such a hit with the public that finally the whole thing shifted over, and management could see that there was a possibility to do it, and they allowed him to run the car.
Now, I heard a rumor that he had a fish on his wall, and it was, I guess, a Stingray, and the fins gave a bluish sort
well,
of
he loved deep sea fishing,
Right.
and of course, if you've ever gone deep sea fishing, when you pull the fish out of the water, it has an incredible, almost luminescent quality to it. And he wanted to create that, especially on a later model of the car called the Mako Shark.
Right.
And if you can see the transition in gradation on it, he was trying to get his painters to paint that, and they went through several iterations of it and couldn't do it. So finally, when he went on vacation, one of the
yeah, that's a funny story. That's a story.
he had this beautiful fish on his wall up in his office, and the guys went up there and stole the fish off, repainted it to match the car.
Oh,
and when
funny.
he came back, of course, it matched. So he said, "Okay, that's it."
That's funny. That's a funny story.
Yeah.
Now, Thunderbird had huge success with a two-seater. In '58, they went to a four-seater Thunderbird, and the sales quadrupled.
Yes, again.
Was there a lot of pressure to, let's make this Corvette thing a four-seater and blah, 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 you know?
Right. Well, of course, the 55 was a big success, and then when they did the four-seater, the sales, even went farther off. So by that time, this car had already been laid out, and they actually did a four-seater version of the car, and there's a picture of it in the book. And I think if they'd gone ahead and produced the car, this car would have lost a tremendous amount of its cachet, because the proportions were so bad on the car that it looked ugly.
Yeah.
And this car is so elegant that if they'd been forced in there. But what they did is that they brought in some of the top management to look at the car, and they scrunched up the back seat. So when the guy got in there, he was so crowded in there, he couldn't even get out. So he decided, no, we're not going to build this thing.
That's funny. You know, it's so funny. People think from the cars and things you've worked on, they go, Pete Brock, was he about 112 now? Because you started so, I mean, you started so young. That was pretty amazing to be 19 years old and working at GM.
Well, I was very, very fortunate because...
well, very talented also. I think you're very modest because in those days, you went to college, you graduated college, then maybe you got, and then maybe when you were 28 or 29,
yes,
you got to do what you did. But you did it at 19 years old, which is pretty impressive.
I found out that a couple of other people there was my head instructor at Art Center School with Strother McMahon, who you know.
Oh, yes, very well.
Strother was actually hired in at 19 as well. And so was Bob Cumberford, who is now the design critique for
yes,
automobile.
I know, Robert. Yeah.
You know, so those are also 19-year-old guys that went in there. And interestingly enough, several of the top guys that came to Art Center came out of one high school in Los Angeles.
Really?
So evidently there was one instructor there who had encouraged them to get involved in the Fisher Body Craftsman's Guild, which is this wonderful contest that was put on at that time. So I remember when I first went into school, I'd had no art background at all. I'd literally talked my way into the school because I'd walked in and seen everything that was there. But there were these incredibly talented kids in there that had already built models and competed in this area. So I had a lot of catching up to do. And I got a lot of help, Strother, George Jurgensen, Jose Ferrar. I mean, these guys were just incredible instructors, and it's a wonderful, wonderful school. If you have any passion for automobiles, this is the word you want to go to school.
you were there in what I like to call the golden age, from the 50s to about, and it all crashed in the mid-70s when cars got really ugly. And
we went through a bad area.
66 is always my favorite year because that was the last year the designer had free reign without the government saying bumpers must be this high.
Yes.
So you had cars like the Lamborghini Miura, like the Corvette Sting Ray, all these all those iconic cars. And it's all in here. It's a terrific book. It's called Corvette Sting Ray, Genesis of American Icon. It's available on Amazon, most good automotive bookstores. But here's his website, and you can get it directly from him.
Yeah, right.
And they also make another edition with the slip jacket.
Yes.
Which is the one I got, which is because I treasure this. It's really fantastic. I mean, this is written by the man who was actually there at the time, not somebody looking over somebody else's shoulders, not hearsay. This is the guy that was right there with Bill Mitchell and all the guys. So it's really the golden age of American sports cars, the mid-60s. Of course, you were involved also with the Cobra, but that's another book. When he writes that one, we'll talk about that. Here, we're talking about the Corvette Sting Ray. So, Pete, thank you very much.
So much, Jay. Thank you.
What an honor. Terrific.
Mm-hmm.